Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The show is about to begin.
Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Opinionated Podcast. I'm your host, Luke Sharon, and today we have a very special guest, Mr. Corey. I saw a video and it was like, I think it was Tyler, and he said your last name, and he's like, your last name's out there.
Yeah, he did. My last name is Kuheana. Tyler likes to rhyme it with Wakanda before he says it, so he can be like, Wakanda Kuheana. Okay, it's good. But, yeah.
That's pretty great. Well, I really do appreciate you being on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is awesome.
So, let's just get started. So, what did you do? Let's just hint to this. What did you do last Saturday?
So last Saturday we had an event called the Celebration of Life event, and for Tyler and I, when we were talking about doing it, there was just a lot of chaos and a lot of craziness going on in the world, and we didn't really know, being people of color and just kind of seeing what's going on. Some of it was not new for us, and some of it was very new. And so we had a lot of, feelings towards that, and kind of after processing it, we wanted to do something that we felt our community needed, something we hadn't seen done in our community before, which was to have an event that is built for people of color to come together and just to be. And that was kind of a big part of it, was we just want to be out in public as certain people don't feel safe, or maybe, some people irrationally don't feel safe, and some people, very, very well don't feel safe for good reasons. So for us, it was just, we're going to be out in the park, and we're going to hang out, and we want our whole community to be able to enjoy free food. We think there's something very symbolic about breaking bread together with people, whether you know them or not, and then on top of that, being able to dance and have a good time, and really for 3 hours in our community change the tone of what was happening, as people were casting judgment and opinions towards other people. We wanted a little bubble in time where that didn't happen, and people could get to know, one another, and just take a break. And if you wanted to go protest afterwards, or you wanted to counter protest, or whatever that was, everybody was invited. But for that moment, we wanted to kind of put everything aside and just exist, and prove that we could exist together without there being any conflict. And Saturday couldn't have gone better for us as far as what we had hoped to see, and even went better than we thought it would. Yeah. So we were pretty excited about that.
I'd call it a success. The one thing I noticed was there was a lot of law enforcement that was there, and they weren't like patrolling to make sure anything was good. They seemed like they were enjoying the event and actually being there. Yeah,
we did invite the police officers, which was for us, it's kind of a very, for me anyways, I'll speak for myself, I won't speak for Tyler. I've not had great police interactions, not because I was doing anything wrong, but because I felt like I was being, targeted a little bit, and, I'd never not complied with the law. I mean, if I get a speeding ticket and I was speeding, I usually say, hey, I have nothing to complain about. If I broke the law, I get a ticket. That's how that works. And there's been times where I've had great interaction with law enforcement. And so for me, we wanted just to kind of set the tone that, we were recognizing everybody despite what job they have, what religion they have, or what anything is going on. We just want to recognize you as people. And part of that for us was making sure that we invited everybody. And so we wanted the local law enforcement to be able to come, feel safe, and for people, specifically people of color who didn't feel safe, have a chance for their little kids to meet police officers and get to know them, and maybe dispel some of that fear that causes, different behaviors in those circumstances. And so we'd met with the chief of police before the event, and he was really supportive, and he was awesome, and asked how he could support us. And we said, just come and eat some food and show up. And, he actually did show up, and some of his officers showed up. So Yeah, it was. I think everybody was a little skeptical at first.
Yeah.
Like, well, what is this really? And we're like, it is actually just a barbecue in the park. So
my sister, when we went, I think she she was walking by the chief of police and she tripped him.
oh no.
I mean, you have to start your criminal record somewhere.
Yeah, no, that's a great place.
Well, let's just get into the very, very easy topic to cover about race. Let's just start. Do you think the protectors with their weapons in downtown CDA were necessary to protect from the businesses from the Antifa threats? Yo, guys, before we continue this episode of the Kinda Opinionated Podcast, I just want to put in this clip where I interviewed some protectors in downtown CDA when it first started happening. Enjoy. Why are you there? Why are you protesting? Are you protesting?
I'm not protesting. I just want to make sure none of that nonsense happens in our town. I got a child who grew up in a safe town.
So you're protecting.
Yes, sir.
So why are you there protecting?
Protecting from all the rioters and protecting all these good people that have businesses around here. We don't want to see it burn down to the ground because we grew up here. And we don't want to see that in our city. We're all about the peaceful protest, but we're not about people destroying our city.
I see. So when did you hear about people coming to Coeur d'Alene?
We obviously saw it going on in Seattle and in Minneapolis and then in Spokane last night. We heard that it was coming to Coeur d'Alene, Idaho tonight, and all of us decided to show up in force and show our support for the local people and to support our local law enforcement to help them out.
Have you seen any rioters yet?
No, we've seen a couple people that are protesting, but they haven't done any rioting yet. But no riots or nothing has broke out yet. Right?
Now back to the interview with Corey.
So personally, having lived in Idaho for a while, it's not the first time I've seen something like it. It is the first time I've seen that many weapons in one area, specifically on Sherman. But there's plenty of times I've seen 8 and 12-year-olds walking down the street with a shotgun and a 30-06, and they wanted to show that they had the rights to have their guns, and I've never been concerned that it would happen. For me, the only real concern that I had with that was I understand why some of these people may be professional, they have military background, and they felt that there was some threat coming. The one thing I didn't enjoy was watching people drink while holding weapons, and so I didn't think it was necessary for that to happen. At the same time, I'm not going to hate on anybody who did. It is a Second Amendment right that they had. They were doing nothing illegal. Do I ever feel like if I was in the same situation, which I am a gun owner and I do have guns, but I would never have done that personally, feeling like our town wasn't maybe as important as of a target for that type of interaction.
That's what I saw as well. Like the one, I don't know. That's another question on why do you think that rumor went out and just went crazy because this extremist anti-fascist group is coming to a small town in Idaho, which didn't make sense.
It didn't make sense to me, but also I will say that there's a lot of things on social media, which that's where, as far as I know and I had witnessed, it came from social media. So taking social media seriously, with the amount and level of what you would call trolling or anything that is on there is I don't think it was necessary for me. I take it with a grain of salt. So if somebody says it's happening, in my opinion, you alert local law enforcement to what's happening and you let them handle the situation. Now, some people believe like these men had a great idea and a great heart behind it, and maybe some of them did. I can't judge them. I don't know them, and I don't know everybody. All I can say is personally, I don't feel safer with a bunch of people I don't know that have assault rifles walking up and down the streets. I felt more concerned because I didn't understand, I guess, the sheer numbers of it. It was probably around 300 to 400 people in a small compact area where I can't vouch for everybody and say they had training to deal with it. And if one bullet went off and there's some alcohol involved, I think the equation adds up to a bit of a mess than it does anything clean and tactical being done in that situation. So that's kind of my take on it is if you're taking your advice from social media, then some people would be doing a lot more stupid stuff than that even. So I don't know. I think cooler heads prevail in every situation. And it's not what I personally would have done, and I did not do.
Yeah. Well, I forgot to say this in the beginning. If I ask like an arrogant question or something like that because I don't have perspective, just let me know. Because
I'm fine. I try to live my life with as little offense taken as possible. So you can feel free to mess up. It's not gonna embarrass me or make me feel uncomfortable. And if I am, I'll tell you.
Okay. So let's move on to another one. A lot of people don't think that racism is still here in Coeur d'Alene because in 1990 something, we got rid of the Aryan Nation. Well, they were marching down the streets, and we got rid of the Aryan nations here for the most part.
Yeah.
Have you experienced racism in CDA or just generally in this area?
I would say I have experienced racism on different levels, but what I've experienced more than racism is ignorance. And for me, that's a very important and clear distinction to make. A lot of people are commenting on other people's cultures or how they look, and they have no exposure to it. And so what that is to me is you don't even know what you actually are saying that you hate. Yeah. And so therefore I have to count it as ignorance. You are ignorant to the idea of different cultures or exposure to it. And so when you're in those situations, for me, I try to say, is this worth it? This person may have come up and made some, and I get them all the time, these weird, remarks of like, hey, where are you from? And I'm like, I'm kind of from all over. I grew up in the military, but, I'm from here more or less. And they'll be like, no, where are you from? And I'm like, I get what you're saying. So I'm just going to, my parents are, my dad's Hawaiian and my mom grew up in Hawaii. So, that's it. And they're like, no, like, where are you from? And I'm like, oh, you're meaning what makes up my ethnicity? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, okay. So that's a different conversation. So for me, I kind of play ignorant myself in that moment just to prove a point that I know what you're trying to ask, but I'm not going to make it as easy for you to get that without finding out why I'm doing that. So
it's not direct. It's more of like a not even subconscious, but like more of a I don't know.
It's not a knowledgeable question they're asking. They don't have experience. Some people do, and I have experience. People using the N-word on me, and I'm not black. I mean, maybe 0.1%, like South African, according to my 23andMe. But other than that, like I have like 15 different nationalities or ethnicities in that respect. But I've had that happen. I've had that happen when I was younger. I've had that happen as I've gotten older. I've had people chase me around in their cars screaming things. So I've experienced these different levels, and some of them are just racist. But most of it is just very ignorant. And once I realized that it was ignorance, it keeps me in a calm state to be able to get to a solution faster.
So why do you think there's such a big level of arrogance and ignorance within not even our community, but just in people who don't experience other people's cultures? You know what I mean? Yeah,
I think it's a lot of people are afraid of what they don't know. And fear to me is the basis of why you would hate somebody. It's a very primary emotion that we have. Like your basic level of instincts is what we call fight or flight. And some people want to fight, and some people want to, tuck tail and run. But anything that you don't know for sure of, there's some air of like, should I be worried about it? That goes on in your mind. And so when you have that fear, and then you have other people with their ignorance say, well, this is what it is, you start just to tend to believe what everybody else believes, because nobody really wants to be singled out ever. And that's the tough part about, being a minority in an area that is okay with singling people out is, they're afraid of what they don't know sometimes. And some of it's just maybe they were taught it. There's also that meme or that commercial that goes around about hate being a very taught thing. You have to learn it. And I believe to an extent that is true, is you're going to take on the beliefs of the people who raised you or the community that you were raised in. And if that's something that's common in there, then it's going to continue to spread until they have an experience where they encounter somebody who's different and it doesn't add up. When they say, well, I met Tyler and he doesn't seem like any of those things. He does this, he's got this podcast, he loves his community, he always talks about how happy he is to be in Coeur d'Alene. That doesn't make sense. Yeah. And then they have to work that out within themselves to figure out, like, maybe that's not the truth. So exposure really, I think, is a big part of that.
So why isn't there more? Because I'm pretty sure the last time I checked, Idaho was 93% white, right? And why don't you think there's more minorities here in Idaho?
Well, from the people that I know, it's the same thing. Fear is they understand this place to be, from the headlines, a racist state. And I can say, as someone who lives here, that my experience, at least in the last 5 years, I maybe have one racially ignorant experience a year. And so for me, having grown up in different areas and experienced it more in some areas than others, it's just kind of part of my life. It's not a part of my life I enjoy, but it's also such a small portion of my life, it's hard to give it thought that often. In a lot of ways, it has made me very paranoid of large crowds and different things like that. And I don't go to a whole lot of events, so it's kind of funny that I threw one with Tyler and a couple other people in the first place. But a lot of that was addressing my own fears about being around people and being like, you know what, if you want people to have more exposure, then you can't really hide away all the time. Yeah. And maybe there's some risk associated with that, but it's worth it if it starts to change people's minds about, big things. And if you can do some small good like that in your life, then it's worth it. But yeah, I think people fear what they've heard about Idaho before, just like, people fear what they heard about in other areas where there's some, disaster or things like that. And it keeps people away until they come here and they experience it for themselves. And then they go, oh, it's not, I didn't see people in Klan hoods walking down the street. I didn't see, that. And everybody said, nice things to me. And then they're like, oh, that's not as bad. Yeah. So exposure once again.
Yeah. Why do you think people, especially people here, why do you think people don't have the mindset that they have the mindset that because the Aryan nations and the what's his name?
Richard Butler?
Yeah, Richard Butler. That guy is gone. We don't have racism. Why do you think people have that mindset?
That because they're gone, that we don't have racism. I think maybe just because they were the poster child for that hate, and to me, because racism is hating something else, it's a heart issue, and you can't always see people's hearts. They don't wear their hearts on their sleeves. They keep quiet about it, and lots of people that I know aren't quite aware that it's wrong or that it's a lot of the people I've become close friends with were really racist towards me and would say horrible comments about my ethnicity or make jokes. And for me, because I can understand that I'm kind of the first person they felt comfortable around, and you get a lot of comments, well, you don't act like them. And it's just like, okay, well, I do look like, them, and these people, are the people I associate with, and that's not the case. And some people are, but after amount of time, they start to realize, like, man, that's really not cool of me. Like, if I consider them a friend, I really wouldn't say this to my friends.
So it all goes back to the exposure.
Yeah, and then that's the thing is, once I think people, even when they seem illogical, get to a point where they're like, I can't. That doesn't make sense. Yeah. It doesn't make sense for me to keep calling this person this if they clearly look uncomfortable and I like being around them. Yeah. And so your behavior starts to change when you care about somebody. And that's the part I think that racism really tries to push away is interaction. and starting to have compassion for that situation. And so that's why it's so easy to yell these things that keep people far away, and they don't have to worry about coming to that own conflict within themselves. Because I think sometimes it's scary to admit you're wrong.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's scary to find out that something you've believed your whole life is not right.
Yeah.
And you having to almost change your identity in some ways because of it. So it's a lot of different moving parts in my mind. And that's just personally what I think. You know, there's somebody else out there who has maybe experienced 10 times the racism I have, that has fact upon fact upon fact. I'm just speaking from my own experience.
Yeah. Well, I hear a lot that raises. Well, I just said raisins. No, that racism is systemic. I don't. What does that mean?
So, from my understanding of what systemic racism is, it's kind of like a business or an entity that is inherently had a root of racism and has carried it on. Maybe they don't even understand why, but it's become a part of the culture. And so once it's a part of the culture, it just continues to develop that way until that culture is canceled out. And so a lot of people feel that way, or, you know, the only time you really hear systemic racism is when it comes to law enforcement. And if you look back in you know, the 60s, that's not that far off from where we're at now. If you have a grandparent that's lived through that experience, that's not old, you know, that's very new. So people see this injustice happening over time. And, you know, it's been a long-standing issue with law enforcement and people of color. I mean, even not just Black people, Native Americans are another group that they're so small and they have such a small voice that not everybody hears that statistic. And on top of that, probably are even exposed less to the Native American population having their own reservation and not a whole lot of culture mixing. And so then that one kind of gets canceled out. But I mean, as far as systemic racism, I just understand it to be a long intertwined relationship with whatever business or practice that's been around and has had that been okay in their system that long. So in your opinion, is the police system systemically, I don't know if that's the correct word, but are they systemically racist towards minorities? I would say, based on the facts, that there's evidence to support that. There's evidence to support that their police have, and not all police stations. And that's the other thing that makes this conversation so nuanced and tough is, do I believe that every police station that has ever existed has been that way? I don't have the facts to it. And for me, if I don't have the facts to it and I can't see it measured out, I'd rather not create an imaginary boogeyman. And that's not what I'm calling systemic racism. I believe there's enough evidence to show that a large amount of that has carried on over time. But in the same way, I hope that people don't judge me by looking at me, I also don't want to judge other things or other people that I don't know. So with the George Floyd incident, that is I don't want to say the main cause. Well, I mean, I think it is the main reason why we see these riots among the other murders that have happened to minorities, specifically Black people. Why do you think people are so? I mean, white people are so not. They just don't want to make a stance on it so much. I think it's definitely harder to address the larger body of people once again, but I think it's so uncomfortable. And I think maybe there's elements that they see true, but I will say the number one thing that gets in the way for me almost every time and everyone else I see is politics. And if it goes against their political beliefs, which I believe are an outward representation of who they are, they feel connected to it. And when you attack somebody's personality, people get really defensive. And politics has moved its way into, you know, this is how we conduct government business and how people have a right to vote. It's become very personal. And so when you speak against someone's political beliefs, it is almost like jabbing at who they are and their personality. And then, you know, to me, it's kind of one of the biggest team sports in the world. You have, you know, the left against the right. And I love football. I'm a big University of Michigan fan, and there's never a day you're going to see me compliment Ohio State.
Yeah.
And it's because that rivalry's there and it exists. And it would be betraying my own team to say that Ohio State player was all right. You just support your team. And that's, to me, what it kind of comes down to is people are afraid to be outcast from their group by saying, you know what, Black lives do matter. And not, and for me, it's gone way beyond the organization.
Yeah.
Black Lives Matter is simply a statement in regards to Black people dying at the hands of police. And then people, instead of addressing the issue, usually bring up another issue like, what about Black on Black crime? And it's just like, well, that's actually an entirely different issue. And the fact that you're trying to divert attention by saying, well, what about this?
Yeah, sometimes when I forget who it was, but we were having a conversation about this, and he said, well, Black people, they're more statistically inclined to commit crimes. And I'm like, well, I'm not talking about them committing crimes. This guy, he whether or not his dollar bill was fake or not, that doesn't
it doesn't warrant murder.
Yeah.
And that's the thing too, is, as I see people bring up this man's past life and not account for the time that he had changed from that, it's a scary thought, because at that point, what you're saying is, A, forgiveness doesn't exist. And B, no one can change. And so now we're comfortable with people making personal judgments and then committing an act as horrible as murder and as horrific as murder, which is a dangerous precedent. And people, I don't think, actually genuinely believe that, especially if they were in his shoes. But once again, it's the easiest way to protect their identity of what they believe and not be outcast from their groups. Because if a Republican person came out and said, you know what, Black lives do matter, blah, 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 and they know everyone around them hates that statement, they are immediately ostracized. And then they're put in some weird kind of version of racism, not that it's race related, but they're ostracized the same way those people of color are. And it feels horrible, and they don't want that. And so rather than being able to logically speak on it, they take a really safe route. And the coolest thing about, at one point before this all kicked off, was at least most people on either side agreed that it was murder and that this man was murdered. And then after that, things came out, and then it became one side against another again. So, I think people are scared to really speak their minds when they have to protect their reputation, or they feel that they have to.
I think we see that a lot with a lot of different issues, where we saw that with, the pandemic that's still going on. We see that, one side saying we need to, we see that with a lot of different issues. And then if you have that opinion against your own political party, it's like, okay, you're not with us because you don't agree with that one issue, which I think is
it just goes round and round, and that same problem keeps coming up. And even I should say, I guess how I can maintain the perspective I have is that I believe in something that's higher and has a different is outside of all of that. And so for me, and I will unashamedly say that I believe in Jesus Christ, and that I believe that he is the answer to a lot of the world's problems. And I believe love does cover a multitude of sins, as it states in the Bible. And I believe that Tyler and I and the team around us, the heart of that event for us, for Tyler and I specifically, was to create an opportunity to have love. And, that aspect of love covering, I don't care what anybody else has done who comes to this, we're just going to set that all aside and create this environment of peace. And, and that to me was a solution for people to take a deep breath And it was so cool to watch people be able to actually talk face to face about what they believed.
Yeah.
I knew somebody who was a very strong conservative person, who talked to somebody who actually came because they believed it was a protest. But rather than getting in an argument and calling each other names and stating facts from their own biased media, what happened was a really amazing conversation that both people, I felt, left respecting one another, and they had listened. And so the more we can approach things with love in that regard, it disrupts that cycle that we see with every major event that happens. Is we can cling to something else other than ourselves, and then we can take a chance to heal or have a moment to have a rational conversation that we don't want to go south.
Yeah, I agree. I know this is a big one, but do you think that racism is in every society in one shape or form?
I mean, I think there's at least the opportunity for racism in every society, and most likely, yes, that you're going to side with the group that you're part of. But, as long as there's hate or an opportunity for people to hate, racism and any other issue that goes along with it is going to be there, and I don't think that anyone is safe from hate. It takes one situation to knock your perspective off and immediately hate somebody. And you grab at whatever you can that identifies them as an enemy or different, and you cling on to why that's the reason they did it. When realistically, there's a lot more than just the melanin in your skin that would lead somebody to do something negative. And, it's a lot more culture-based sometimes than it is just about skin color. But, every time when it comes to this, everybody throws the baby out with the bathwater. And it's easier to do it. And from a logical human perspective of anger and how quick it hits and how much rationale goes out the window and what you cling to in that moment, it makes sense to me that humans fall into it so often. But I don't think it's okay for anybody to do that. And if you see it, then you should take time to be a peacekeeper between that situation. And let them move forward. Some people's minds you can't change, and maybe somewhere down the road that you can have it. And I believe the more loving interactions that you give to those people, the more opportunity there is for change. But anytime somebody comes against you and says, well, you deserve hate back, it's just going to keep going down the same road. So, and it's hard not to. I'm not going to say it's an easy thing to forgive, and it's not an easy thing to not give in to hate. It's a very difficult thing. And that's why I think there's just so much of it, because it comes easy to people.
This is another question. Do you think that when people say Black Lives Matter, and then people are like, oh wait, no, all lives matter, do you think that is deflecting from the situation, or do you think that is racist, or do you think that is like, what do you think that statement is?
So for me, it's easy to say Black Lives Matter. Because I'm, Tyler's like a brother to me, and he's Black. Black lives do matter to me. I have family that's Black. They matter to me. So it's not a hard statement for me to give. And I believe that if we're just talking about the sentence and not this organization that people are all upset at, the sentence itself came from people being murdered by the police. That's what it was, a statement that saying, hey, we do matter. All lives matter, in my opinion, came out as a response to Black Lives Matter. Of course, everybody knows all lives matter. I know all lives matter because my wife is a white woman, and my children, are part white. That doesn't detract from anything for me. It doesn't make my wife's life or my children's lives less important. So for me, once again, it's kind of birthed out of this political stance of, well, I need to say this now. And it's just like, everybody should know all lives matter. But, it got a political backing. So it came as, this is one side saying Black Lives Matter. And so the other side had to respond. And they try to one-up them by saying, well, all lives matter. And it's just like, well, yeah,
Well,
Everybody thinks all lives matter. Like, the couches in your house, the clothes we're wearing probably came from a multitude of people. And that's what's kind of funny is you can say, well, this, race does blah, 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 blah. But maybe they made your hat that you're wearing. That's whatever it is. Maybe they made the shirt you're wearing. You don't know. Like, nobody thinks that deeply about it. But I get that the sentence all lives matter makes sense. But when it's used to demean or to deflect from a people that's being hurt, I don't think it's the smartest idea, and I don't think it's genuine, because then if you get other political issues involved, sometimes not all lives matter to those people that are saying all lives matter. So
I saw it was actually quite funny. I saw I think it was a meme, and it was like, Jimmy's house burned down, and he's like, my house mattered. Why did my house burn down? My house matters. And then there was this one guy, and he walked by Jimmy and said, oh, don't worry, man. All houses matter. He just walked back into his house. And I was like, I think that's a great, that's a great way to explain it, because it's the same. Like, of course, your life matters.
Yeah.
You're white. Of course, your life matters. You're Asian or whatever.
Yeah.
But there's people that are minorities who are dying, and their lives don't. They do matter. But right now, when people are killing people just because they have the not so much the bias towards them, that means that those people don't value.
And that's the thing. I wish people just, if they really did think all lives matter, that they would care enough to listen to a group of people who are going through a tough time.
Yeah.
And if all lives really matter, which, like I said, I feel like it's a pretty obvious thing that all lives matter.
Yeah.
Then, why not help somebody out who, we can easily recognize is in trouble?
Yeah.
And I saw a meme that said, somebody said blue lives matter. And the person said, well, all jobs matter. And the guy said, well, those jobs aren't in danger right now. And it was just like, that's perfect. So you get it. You're so close to getting the point. Yeah. But, once again, it comes down to sides. And I can't fully say that. I can't admit I'm wrong. Yeah. And that's the tough part, is when you have pride and you have ego, it prevents you from getting to a solution. And so I think that's the tough part about it, is I understand why people are saying it in the terms of they're trying to pick their side, and they're trying to let everybody know that that's what side they're on.
Yeah.
But in my personal opinion, it should be going without saying that all lives matter. So I don't take offense to Black Lives Matter as a statement in regards to what's happening to Black people around the world, to Native American people around the world, whatever else is going on. But I try to be patient and to be respectful, even if that's what you choose to say. I have plenty of people in my life that I love that say all lives matter. And because I know them, I don't have to take offense to it. And it's easier to have a loving conversation where you don't take offense to it and you let them work it out. And I've seen that do a lot more than simply repeating the same statement, Black Lives Matter, against, to them. And I can share that with those people, and they go, I get what you're saying, but it's tough. It's tough. It's a tough thing to let go of when you've got those sides picked.
Because it's like, it's my party that's going, and they're for me, so I have to be for them, and this is the way they're showing it.
Yeah, and that's why it's easy for me to say, I'm going to seek God's counsel on this. I'm going to seek what I think is right. And if I'm not doing something that I feel is honoring to God, that's my issue. I'm not going to blame it on a party. I'm not tied to any one of those things. If I feel something in my spirit is wrong, then I want to address it, and I want to be there to support people, whether that's unpopular. And for me, anytime I take that approach, I usually get hate from both sides. Yeah. I get hate from people who support Black Lives Matter because they think that I am giving in to all lives matter, and I don't have an opinion. And all lives matter people think that I'm taking Black Lives Matter side. So it is almost kind of rough in the sense of they're like, you didn't pick a side.
Yeah.
So now we both have an issue with you in that. And it's just like, well, you know, I'm not going to do that because I feel convicted that it's wrong for me to not try to be somebody who creates peace in the midst of this. And I'm not saying, you know, I believe that you should stand up, especially as an American, and be able to stand up for what you believe is right. But that also means that you're going to get criticism for it. And that's how the world works.
Yeah.
So,
well, here's another question to ponder. Why do you think so many people, and a lot of people here that I've spoken to, they also have this view when they think of Black Lives Matter protests as of now, and when they think of We Can't Breathe or I Can't Breathe protests, they think of every single one is riots. Every single one is looting, and everyone is so violent, and like people are dying on the streets because of it. Do you think the way the media is portraying these things is a massive issue to, like, do you think they're helping the cause, or do you think they're just distracting from it and being like, hey guys, you know, like who's going to get the more attention, the 20 people who are peacefully protesting, or the like the nice amount of people who are going over and looting the Nike store?
No, I think you're right on the money with that one. I don't think the media wants peace because peace doesn't get attention. And I can say that from personal experience, and I won't name any media outlet that inquired about our Celebration of Life event. But there was a media outlet that respected our wishes of, we didn't want it publicized. We didn't want any article to come out about our event until, you know, the following week when we already had it and there was some time to calm down. And I really respect that, because to me, there's not somebody trying to cause this frenzy of chaos. But I really do believe that there was other media outlets that thought we were throwing on this big memorial and it would be a protest.
Yeah.
And as soon as we said, man, it's just literally, as the title says, we are celebrating being able to live life. If you want to come and celebrate to live, you know, remember somebody who you've known that died, or, you know, whatever it is, or if you just want to come celebrate life in the hopes that more events like this create a more positive future for you and your family, that's what that's about. And as soon as we had stated that, the media no longer took interest in covering our story. Which we were fine with, because we just wanted to impact the people around us in our community. We don't care to be noticed. I certainly do not care to be noticed. I'm surprised I podcast. I'm usually so shy. So it's funny because we weren't seeking that, and so we had no problem with it. But it just kind of goes to show you what the media wants. Yeah. And even on a small local level, like in Coeur d'Alene, some of the outer media sources didn't want to cover something that was peaceful. Yeah. It's not interesting. It doesn't sell. And so I think the media, every major media outlet deserves to be chastised for their divisive coverage of what's happening, and that they add on to humanity's depravity, and they add on to the chaos by choosing to only fuel this ever-growing fire, and they only report negative. And I've tried to watch the media and count how many times I heard a positive story just on local news, and maybe one every couple of weeks. You know, it was just horrible. So, I mean, if you really take into account and judge what you're watching, and you just took a minute to say, I'm going to tally how many positive stories there were, or any good news compared to the amount of bad, it's quite shocking. So I 100% believe that the media does no favors, and almost in a conspiracy theory type way, seems like they really want this to keep being fueled, and for there to be more hate and anger than there is peace and resolution. Yeah.
Do you think that is the main cause of the reason why people think that every single Black Lives Matter protest is a riot or a looting?
I think it's a major contributor. I won't say that it's the main reason why. A lot of people just have that in their hearts. That's what the they want the story to be. Similarly to what happened on our town is I think some people didn't even read about this Antifa crew coming through. They just heard it and said, man, that sounds great. I'm going to get my gun and I'm going to go downtown. I don't think everybody did that. But it's a herd mentality. Once your group of people starts acting in a certain way, you don't want to look out of place. And some people, I'm sure, wanted to be down there to be intimidating and to be to discourage people from protesting even. But at the same time, I have to respect the fact that no protesters got hurt. And no protesters, from what I could tell, weren't necessarily silenced. They did get criticism that was, to me, undue and not fair. But it is people's right to give them that criticism. And that's what you're going to get when you protest something. And it's something as large as racism, is you're going to get blowback. And people protest because they genuinely believe that A, it's their right, and B, it's necessary. So you're going to have to take some of the criticism, whether it's unfair or not. It comes with protesting. But, to everybody's credit, no one got hurt. And I'm glad no one got hurt. But at the same time, it's not how I would go about it.
Do you think that the riots and the looting, well, mostly the riots, I mean, looting is part, whatever. Do you think the riots are contributing to any part of the movement?
I can't say some of the changes that I've seen aren't in response to people's outrage. Do I like anybody stealing or doing horrible things to businesses? Did I like seeing some black owners of black businesses have their dreams go up in flames? No, absolutely not. I believe rioting is a symptom of too much hurt. I believe rioting is it's not a just or good thing, but at the same time, in the same way, if somebody hits you in the face so many times, it's not logical for somebody to strike back. So I don't think it's right, but at the same time, because there's been so much pent up aggression and all these other things, that it's not crazy to me that it happened. And then I do believe also that the media helps further that narrative. There was one that I think got, and I could be wrong, but I did see it, where it was a shot from the movie World War Z that a major news media outlet used to say that was a riot. And they took the shot and then they put it in this city and said this was that city that was up in flames, and it wasn't true. So, when I see stuff like that, I'm like, I almost feel like they're almost occurring even more because that's what you're making it look like. And some places look absolutely trashed. And then I've seen places that actually the people who went and protested came back and cleaned up all the mess. And so, it's, once again, I can't judge every single situation. I don't like that it ever had to come to a point where people rioted. But at the same time, as a human being, and understanding how people get pushed and you push back, it's not shocking to me that it happened. And maybe, I don't know, I can't say that some of the changes that certain cities have responded to with whether it's defunding the police or reforming or arresting, officers as soon as they see that the rioting somehow didn't affect it. It very well could have. So, it's, to me, it's just a very sad thing to see people who are hurt so bad and then in turn, let that hurt out in a very destructive way.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I just have a couple more questions. Well, two. Have you, like you said in the beginning, but let's just say it again, but if you're willing to, do you have like an encounter with the police that you feel as if it was unwarranted? Like they pulled you over just because they were suspicious, or? Yeah,
I've had a couple of those. Where they couldn't state to me what I did wrong when I was driving, and they wouldn't state to me, and they continued to hassle. Fortunately for me, maybe it hasn't happened so often that I didn't feel the need to get to a point of frustration where I challenged it. in the sense of, are you going to really do this right now? I've had people, I was sitting in a park with a bunch of coworkers, and it was me and another black guy amidst probably 8 to 10 other white people. And we were just having lunch, and we had 2 officers walk up to us and just start asking us questions. What are you guys doing? Oh, we're sitting in the park having lunch. Oh, well, why are you guys sitting over here? Because we just got food from this place and we wanted to sit down here. And then you start to get the tone of the conversation is why aren't you asking anyone else?
Yeah.
And we're the only 2 people of color sitting there. And then you start to realize what this is. And to me, it was just intimidation of people who thought maybe because of the department they were in or their own personal ideas that this is what they should have done, or just thought it would be funny to go and do it and make people uncomfortable. I don't know the reason why they chose to do it to us that day other than racism exists. And sometimes people take joy in that. And I think it's wrong, obviously, but, I kept my head about me and I addressed them as officer. I remain respectful because the only thing I can manage is my own response.
Yeah.
And for me, if I didn't have the beliefs that I do, then I could easily see how I would respond with anger and frustration and pain because I didn't have another way to reconcile that within myself. So there's been plenty of times where I've been in that situation where afterwards I'm, screaming in my car upset because, why does this have to keep happening? I didn't do anything. And there's other times where, somebody else had called the police on me because I was sitting there minding my own business and they didn't like that I was in their neighborhood and had fabricated some evidence that I had a gun in my car. And I don't know how they would have known that. But then I got, angry police officers because they're just taking the call for what it is. And they hassled me. But then after that, and they realized I was just waiting for this person to get home. And they were like, oh. And I'm like, they live right there. That's the only reason I'm parked here is I'm just waiting. And they're like, well, you shouldn't be waiting here. And I'm like, well, why not? And so, there was no good answer to it. And then, but, it was 3 police officers for me. And it would just seem like, okay, it's a bit much. Maybe you all happen to be driving together and figured, why not? I don't know. And, for me, for a long time in my life, I had harbored a lot of hate and a lot of resentment. And, if you caught me in that time of my life, while this was going on, what's happening in our world today, I probably would have easily said, I don't care what happens to cops. You know why? Because I've never had a great interaction. But thank God that, I've grown a little wiser in my age, and I can understand that it's sad when anybody gets murdered. It's horrible when any human loses their life before their time. And for me to be happy about that, to me, is just as wrong. And I can only speak for myself. I can put myself in my old shoes and other people's shoes and see why they have those responses, because they're tired of something and the world didn't care about them. But, I don't think it makes it right, but I do understand that mindset.
Yeah. Thank you for answering my question.
Yeah.
So I'll just end with this. What do you think people can do, specifically white people, can do to make the situation better for minorities?
So I guess I'll give you a 2-part question. A lot of people have asked Tyler and I how they can support community or people in this community or, wherever they're at. Yeah. In this moment, I don't mean to keep busting out Bible things, but there's a story of Job. Do you know the story of Job?
My mom's over there. And she's like, oh, yeah, of course you know.
Of course you know the story of Job. Job was a guy who endured a lot of suffering for what apparently seemed no reason. And Job had his family taken from him and went through just awful amounts of physical and emotional, mental stress. And at least in the beginning, I really have always, during this time, have meditated on what his friends did. And when Job's friends first got there, all they did was sit and they grieved with Job with how terrible everything had gone with him.
Yeah.
and they didn't give him any advice at that time. They just sat quiet and they cried with him, and they just were with him to let him know that he wasn't alone. And I think that's a very important thing for not just our community, but for every community, is if, you know, you're somebody who doesn't have that experience, whether you're white or any other color of person, or, you know, person of color that doesn't know how to respond. You know, one of the greatest things you can do is let people know you're there just by surrounding them. You don't have to give advice that you don't know. You don't have to feel lost. What you can do is just say, hey, man, I'm here for you. And it doesn't have to be much. And why people choose to respond is out of their own uncomfort. Their discomfort with, I don't know what to do. And us as humans really like to do stuff when we don't know what to do. When you get frustrated or you're upset, lots of people clean their house. Yeah. And it's great to clean your house, but, you know, it's this activity to do. Oh, you got a point. But, you know, it's good to do things like that. But it's to help them cope with their stress. Yeah. And so, you know, if you can assess and be like, what's the best way I can do it? I think, in my own opinion, it doesn't heal this great hurt of racism. But in that moment, you know, how much more can you come across as a friend than when you're willing to sit in something uncomfortable with somebody? It takes a lot of mental awareness to be like, this isn't about me, this is about them, and I don't need to say anything. Even though that awkward silence, when you just sit with somebody and nobody says anything, you feel the need to say something because it's uncomfortable. Yeah. Is learning how to be like, maybe I can share in a drop of their pain by being uncomfortable with them and just sitting and letting them know that I'm present, and not forcing them to talk by saying, here's this advice, or not forcing them to do anything. And in a social media sense, maybe it's not posting all this stuff about things that you really don't understand. And that's your way of support. And I get your heart behind it. But sometimes to me, it comes off as just disingenuous, and it comes off as you trying to be busy, when it's just like, why can't you just say, my heart hurts for these people and I stand with them? Yeah. And let that be it. It cuts all that negative opinion down where the other side starts attacking you. Mm-hmm. And you can maybe just call or text those people, hey, you don't need to respond. I just want to let you know I love you and that I'm so sorry that you're going through this. Mm-hmm. I don't know what to do, but if there's anything you need me to do, please let me know. But know that my heart hurts for everything you're going through. And if there's any way I can help, I want to help, and just leave it at that. Yeah. Them knowing that, whether it takes a week or a month for them to reach out, is incredible. When people support me during those times, I don't know what to do because it's rare anybody has offered that support. But for me personally, when somebody's like, man, I'm so sorry that happened to you. I'm really upset by that as well. I don't know what you're going through, but if you ever needed to talk, or you just want to sit or hang out or distract yourself, let me know when I'm there. And I'm like, wow, my heart is super touched. I don't want to leave my house at that point still. Mm-hmm. But, you know, it gives me something to be grateful for, is that I'm not alone in this. Yeah. And so that would be my advice to now. What you can do in the long run is just educate yourself. If that exposure is what you need, try to get that exposure, and don't do it at, you know, people of color's expense. Yeah. But be genuine, and you don't have to go and be like, well, now I need to make 5 Black friends and 3 Native American friends, and I know Hawaiian. You know, it's not about that. It's, you know, if you see racism in your community, maybe try to be the peacekeeper of that. You don't need to go and tell somebody you're wrong. That never works. Yeah. You know, and that never works for anybody. But maybe say like, hey, tell me why you think what you do, or, you know, get to know them in a small way. Maybe go out to coffee and sit down and be like, you know, so what's going on? Get to know who they are as people first, and then be able to speak, you know, to their lives later on of like, you know, I don't believe that, but, you know, maybe could you tell me why you do? You know, in those conversations, it takes time, and change takes a long time. So there's no immediate response other than educate yourself about what people are going through. Try to get exposure to different people's experiences if that helps you out and that person is willing to. And then on top of that, just try to create a community of love around you. Create events where everybody's welcome and they don't have to worry about stuff, or just invite people over to, you know, to hang out or go hang out with them and be like, hey, you know, and just try to be conscious of of how you make other people feel. One of the things that I don't agree with is self-hatred for your skin color. I've seen a lot of my white friends who almost get really apologetic about being white, because they're like, man, this is like their very existence is offensive. And I just want to let people know, I don't think that's right. My wife sometimes feels so bad about things going on. She's like, how can I do anything? I'm just a white person. And for me, it's saying, don't hate yourself for it. That's not the solution either, is to, I believe God made us all believe God made us all super sacred. I believe the way you look and that you were born with is sacred to God. And so for you to hate that is to hate what God created. And I don't think that's right either. So, you don't have to accost yourself or put yourself through any sort of punishment. Just try to educate and know your environment, and continue to have that conversation going. And when it comes up, it's okay to say, I don't know. It's okay to say, I don't have the answers, but I'd love to find out, if you have any, or where I could read about it or do something. I'd love to learn more. So just a willingness really at the end of the day to try to change and figure out how to do it through different resources and people. Yeah.
Well, thank you for being on my podcast today, Mr. Corey.
Yeah, no problem. You can call me Corey. I appreciate the respect, but you can call me Corey.
Okay. Well, I really do appreciate it. And I'm really glad that you were able to give people some insight and your opinions on some of these topics.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for even allowing me to come on and to talk. I think it's super awesome, and I feel super blessed that you even asked. So I appreciate being on here.
Well, thank you. Guys, if you enjoyed this episode of the Kinda Opinionated Podcast, follow it, like it, subscribe it, do all of those things. I don't know all those platforms, but everybody have a great day. Bye.
Treat me this way.